All yours.
Awesome. Yay. Hi. Okay, everybody. Today on my channel, No Ticket Backward, I have a special guest. Her name, oh my gosh, Kristen. I know your name. It just went blank. I'm having performance anxiety. Stage fright got me.
It's
Kristen
right.
was she's been my business coach. Like, I know her. We have known each other for years now. Um, so she started a new coaching with a new program since we worked together, and I just love the format that she uses. So one of the things with moving forward, so the idea of starting over is the theme of the channel. Sometimes, it's like your whole life blows up and you have no way to go to what was existed before, whether it's someone passes away, a relationship implodes, your house burns down. There's so many ways that that can happen. And it happens to everyone. It doesn't matter. There's no socioeconomic class. There's no marginal, there's nothing that takes you away from that, because life, like, we all will go through places where we start over, although the degree of the start over may vary greatly from person to person and story to story. But we all do, and it's really hard when you have to start over and you don't have the life skills you need to start over at the level you need to start at. It's like, you know what you know, and sometimes you know what you don't. Like, sometimes you're aware of things that you don't know, right? But sometimes you're completely unaware of your own ignorance. You're unaware of your own lack of knowledge, your own skill sets, your own knowledge base. Um, when I first got in the working world, I was fascinated by the stock market, but being fascinated and actually getting that knowledge was two very different things. And that can happen with any new beginning. And what I like about Kristen's work, I know I'm just yapping, but there's context. Kristen helps people who are kind of shifting their identity. So they've been one person and they're going to be somebody else, but they're more authentic version of themselves. And so there's life skills with that. And so that's her specialty. And that's what she's going to talk about. And then she might have other things to add. Things I don't know need to be mentioned. So, yeah, after that very wordy introduction, Kristen, it's all you.
Fabulous. Well, I am so excited. I am like seriously stoked that you reached out and you have been in my circle and I've been in your circle. We've been aware of each other for a really long time. And a couple of things that you just said then really resonated with me. I've been through a few iterations. So we first worked together when I was doing business coaching, but a lot
Mm-hmm.
of what I did as a business coach was really helping people become the person that they could be to hold the capacity of their business as big and as fully as they needed to. And most of what I did, well, when I first started coaching, it was as a life coach for women who were going through transition. Because even I didn't have any of my own shit figured out, but I felt like I could help other people figure theirs out. And then it grew and it evolved and it morphed, and I was using my business experience. And as I did that for a few years, I realized that really the biggest growth, the most wins that people were having was in that identity shift. Um, and not necessarily in trying to become someone else, but in stopping having to try to be who everyone expected them to be. And so I think the way that you've explained that is really it's very insightful in that, and it's really kind of, it's down to earth and cuts it right down to the bare bones of what it is. Because so often we go through life, we pick up all of these stories, these expectations, these patterns, these habits, these ways of being that become normal, they become
Mm-hmm.
natural, they become our habitual reflexive responses because of our life experience. And we get to a certain point where we realize that those aren't necessarily allowing us anymore to grow into the fullness that we want to grow into. And we've reached an upper limit. It's almost like we keep hitting our head up against the ceiling, but we can't see it. And so we can't see how to get out of it. We know it feels uncomfortable, but at the same time, it's safe because it's the place that we've always known. And we don't know how to shift and how to be differently that feels much more aligned and in tune with our own selves And unfortunately, a lot of what the self-help industry or the healing industry shows is that you have to upend your whole life. And we've been through plenty of upending, right? Like, I don't want to upend everything again. I've done that enough.
Mhm.
It's traumatic enough. And so it's more about how can we find the ways to be, embody, but to be, to behave, to start acting as if we are that favorite self, right? The person that we're probably at our core, as opposed to the best self that everyone else tells us our life should look like, or how we should be, or all of the things that we picked up just as protection mechanisms as we were going through life. And for a lot of us, that big sort of awakening moment, or the big moment where we say, well, we're not going to deal with this crap anymore, comes when there's been some version of an upheaval. Um,
Mhm.
for me, the first stage of my upheaval was when I left my husband after he was cheating on me. That was pretty big
I'll
upheaval.
do it.
I had
Yeah.
freaked out,
Huge.
I knew what was happening, and that was like everything crumbled underneath me, and I lost my footing. And really questioned a lot about who I was and how I was showing up and what was my worth and my value. And then I decided to go off on an adventure, and the adventure was not as adventurous as I hoped it would be. It was a lot more
Mhm.
slog and work. I left the country and went to a new country to work in Malaysia and have a great new job. And the job turned out to not be as aligned. And looking back now, I say that, and it's not necessarily that the job wasn't aligned. It was that I wasn't in a better place. I was still going through things the same way. I hadn't done a lot of the inner work to get out of all of that stuff about my self-worth and everything else. And then my job ended. And so it was ripped out from under me again. When
So
I,
I'd like to I'm
hmm,
sorry, I'm gonna interrupt because I actually want to flesh this out a little bit because this is such a perfect story and example of exactly what we're talking about. Okay, so you had to start over because your identity as a wife, like in that container when he cheated on you, like that just everything came undone, right? And I mean, after seeing Eat, Pray, Love, like yeah, going to an island in Southeast Asia with a job, like, and is that where you had your like Vespa or your like little moped thing?
yeah, so that was
Yeah.
after I lost the job and I had the moped. I went
Oh,
to Bali, but I was in Bali for a year and a half before I was
oh,
ride my own scooter. I would
oh.
happily of some random strangers at any time, but I realized later I didn't trust myself. I was telling myself all sorts of stories, but I didn't trust
Mm,
the scooter. But yeah, the scooter was in Bali with
okay.
sort of eat, pray,
We'll
love.
get to there. I do want to rewind just a little bit. I didn't know that this story was so like adventure packed. That's exciting. So like when your life appended, when you said earlier that sometimes you expect that it's like you don't change who you are, like who your identity is kind of fixed. And I loved when you talked about the habits, like you had patterns, like your list that you had was so perfect. I'm like, yeah, all those things. Um, so in that, it was like a lot of times we get this idea that something external has to happen to us to shift the internal, right? So that happened with your I was gonna say your wedding. Sorry. Marriage. My words are struggling today. So it
Marriage
happened
wasn't very long. So the wedding was great. The marriage wasn't very long. So we can call it the
oh,
marriage or we can call it the wedding.
oh, okay. I didn't know it was short-lived. So many new things I'm learning about you. But you expected when you went to go to Malaysia, it was like another begin like a starting over. It was another appending, as you called it. And it was like you expected that to be the shift for you. But what you were just saying was the shift needed to happen internally.
Mhm.
So that's what I wanted to go back and highlight. Like, it's kind of interesting because it's like something in life forces you to start over, and so sometimes you get this idea in your head that something external has to trigger any type of start over, any type of change in who you are, right? So New Year's rolls around. Okay, that's an external event. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to start exercising. I'm going to stop drinking, whatever it is. Or like Lent's coming along. I'm going to give up meat. Like an external event that comes and like we shift who we are in response to that event. but it's like it works so much better if you go inside and do the inner work first. And so how would you explain the inner work to somebody who doesn't have the broad base of context that you have?
Mm, that is a great question. So the inner work that I do with people is helping them to see what their beliefs about themselves are. So what they believe they're capable of, what they believe, some of the characteristics and traits. A lot of times that people will associate with themselves and they'll say, oh, I'm disorganized, or I'm flighty, or I'm flaky, or I'm not very good at remembering things. And those beliefs will tend to then determine and dictate how they show up in certain contexts and
Mm,
situations. And so we peel them back, right? And say, okay, but is this really a belief of yours? Or is it a thought that you're having that is deciding how it is you're going to show up, right? Because we then go into situations with like armor or expecting that because I'm disorganized, somebody else is judging me. And so I have to present a certain way so that I don't get judged. So we kind of
mm,
slowly go into exploring what all of those belief patterns are. And when I say slowly, we do it over the course of a couple of weeks because most of the women that come to me and work with me have had some sort of a traumatic situation happen, or they're still living in a trauma response. They're in fight, flight, or freeze.
mm,
And so we don't want to just dive right into like this deep soul inner excavation because it's too scary and our brains can't process it. So we have to go step by step into understanding that. So we create safety, we look at what their values are, what's really important, what does what would an ideal day feel like? So we start talking about like these newer, more optimistic, more hopeful, more joyful feelings. And then we start finding evidence of that and where it is happening so that we can counterbalance the evidence of
mm.
the narrative that they have inside their brain. Um, and then from there, we start creating action plans and new ways of being. So the inner work is really, it is that sort of soul level. I always point here, it's
Mhm.
right at that part where you are. Like for me, I'm always like I'm either in my head or in my heart, right? Like that's the me that is
Yeah.
and sits in those two places. Um, and so it's that, like that gut feeling that you feel yourself, that buzziness that's kind of like right in the center of your chest. And so we I ask questions. It is as simple as that, but asking questions that are inviting reflection and new perspectives so that people can get beyond what their initial reflex or reaction is and really see the truth of what their belief is so that they can decide if it's really a truth, or if it's a belief, and if they want to reframe it, and then what reframing it would feel like for them. So a
I
lot,
love that.
yeah,
I love
thanks.
the very compassionate. It sounds like soccer, like this Soc Socratic method where you ask questions.
Mm,
And I was talking to a friend and we were talking about the difference between mentoring and coaching because I didn't really have that as a concept. And she's gone through a lot of like coaching certifications. So she mentioned that coaching is that type of thing where you ask questions. You don't just give the answer, whereas mentoring is based on your own experience and you're giving advice to a person based on your experience. And both have value. And I think that when people are kind of going through that, it's really powerful for them. If you're like more of a do it yourself type of person, the coaching is so much more powerful than mentoring. If you're really good at following instructions and you need that, then and it's like that's mentoring, it might be more useful. And that I think that's really helpful if you're in that stage and you're like, I do want external help, but I don't know how to go about it. I would like everything you said, it just parlays very nicely with the story you were sharing about Malaysia. So I want to go back to that. Um, so you said that when you left, you were expecting to have an experience in Malaysia. The job wasn't aligned, things weren't, but you hadn't done the inner work. So you had beliefs about yourself that were not putting you in the place that you wanted to be, like mentally, spiritually, situationally, because you weren't able to make that what you wanted it to be. Um, can you share more about that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I didn't know at the time that that's what was happening. It took
Yeah.
me, it was a couple of years later that I realized that and could look back. So
Mm,
got to Malaysia, I thought, okay, I'm out of this relationship. I'm doing the big adventurous thing. It's going to be amazing. And I got there and I was not cultivating positive relationships,
mm,
not cultivating like a great sense of community. And some of that was external in that the place was really hard to do that.
were
Was
you were you in fight or flight? Were you in a survival kind of state, just as in reaction to everything? And you
I'm
just didn't
sure
realize?
I was. I'm sure I
Mm,
just hadn't given myself, like, given my nervous system time to really calm down, right? And to get out of, really given myself time to, yeah, to just calm down, right? I think I was just like operating at like that, fritzing out,
yeah.
where it's all buzzy. Um, and I didn't have the tools to do it. It was not, this was not the language that I would have used then. I would not have known that this is the work that I needed to do. It took me a lot longer to figure that part out. And so I was just existing as exactly the same person, but in a different place and expecting a different result, without changing any of how I showed up. I'm not saying that I had to change myself, because what I've actually done is right now in my life, I am so much more true to the self that I always believed I was. Um,
Mm,
but I had so many protective mechanisms around me that even I couldn't see and feel and lean into that. Like I couldn't get vulnerable enough, to be that vulnerable even with myself, because I had to be so protective. Again, protective of my heart. Like I keep going here, don't I? But I had to be very protective of my heart and myself. And so there were a lot of walls that were built up. So I was very,
makes sense.
very driven, very corporate, very get stuff done, very da 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 da, go go.
Mm,
And it wasn't until I was in Bali, and I was in Bali for about a year, a year and a bit, before I had my breakthrough moment. So Brene Brown, refers to her moment as it was her breakdown, but then she strikes it through and says breakthrough. And I'm like, that's what it was. Like, I had a breakdown, but it was really a breakthrough. And that's when everything really started to shift for me. And when I could see that how I was being, and by protecting myself and like putting up all of these defense mechanisms, it was keeping me from being myself and keeping me from really knowing myself. And so the next few months were really an exploration of what that could look like and how that could change.
what was that realization like? Because it's an it so you went to Malaysia expecting an adventure. It wasn't the adventure that you had. You had a job and it was misaligned. You ended up in Bali after a year and a half. So there's an adventure there where it's like your awareness, you kind of came to know what you didn't even know you didn't know. It is a type of an awakening, but it's also um like to grow as a person, if you've had like this and you want to grow over here, you have to know that over here even exists before your mind can start to shift, before your heart can start to shift, before your creative center can be, and your rooting and your support system and all of that, right? So it's like you have to conceive, even if it's a tiny, like sometimes when I like the mustard seed in the Bible when it talks about faith. I mean, I don't know, I'm not a whatever theologian, but it's like I see the mustard seed like gardening, right? Here's my gardening metaphor. But you can't plant a plant if you haven't got the seed for the plant. Like you have to have the seed or a rooting or a cutting, depending if you really want the rhizome, whatever, the spore if you want to get into fungus. But you have to have that organic material that is a piece that's like got the coding, so to speak, in how to form life in that organism. You have to have that before you can grow the organism. So like I'm going to go back to seeds. You have to have a seed before you can grow the plant. Um, if you don't have the seed, and so you have to have a conception of that thing, of that knowledge. You don't have to have the knowledge or all of the knowledge, but you at least have to know that there is this other thing that can be planted.
If there's another possibility, yes.
Yes.
And I think, what happened for me is one of my habits and patterns and my ways of being from when I was a kid, from when I was teeny tiny, was to blame everyone else and to deflect attention, responsibility, blame away from myself. Now at work, I would always have, and I'm a very responsible person, so I would have taken responsibility for, but I still would have deflected blame, right?
Mm,
And it was very easy for me to blame everyone else for what was happening to me.
mm,
And I'm going to go into this a little bit deeper too, because also having said that, I very much get that like our lived experience is our lived experience. My lived experience as a white woman who has had the privilege of living in other countries is very different to someone whose lived experience is as a person of color, or who comes from a disadvantaged background or hasn't had the opportunity to live in other countries. And it wasn't my fault that my husband cheated on me, right? Like that's what I felt for a really long time. And
mhm.
so it was one thing to be able to blame him. It wasn't my fault that I ended up in a job that didn't look like what I'd expected and that my boss and I didn't have the best working relationship. But there were ways that I engaged, behaved, and navigated those situations that were entirely my responsibility. And so when I had that moment, that realization, there was what came up for me was realizing that I had on the surface taken responsibility for things and come across as very responsible, but I hadn't taken that responsibility within myself. And I hadn't taken
Mm.
responsibility for seeing what other possibility there could be unless someone else was showing me that possibility. And so
Uh,
the breakthrough moment was part of it was really sad for having carried that for such a long time. But for in that blame of other people that was protecting me from having to take the responsibility, it was also keeping me from doing what I really wanted to do. It was keeping me from being who I wanted to be because I was just blaming other people for not allowing me to do it. Right. And I've never been the kind of person that likes rules or likes being told what to do. And
yeah.
so, like, if my mother were to hear me say this, she would be like, "That girl, you have not been that person that just listens to people or does what she's told." But I internalized it, right? Even if on the surface it looked a certain way because it was still blaming and pushing back, but it wasn't ever doing that level of excavation to see how I was just perpetuating that cycle that wasn't allowing me to flourish and to grow in the place where I'd been planted. And so when I could see that it was really easy for me to just lash out and blame other people, uh,
Yeah.
you know, my my working relationship with my boss was not great. Um, but I played a big part in that, right? Something that wasn't my fault, but I played a part in it. I was a character in that story, and I continued to perpetuate that story. And once I had that realization, it was so much easier to just let go of all of that, right? Like I'd forgiven the situation with my husband was over and done, and that was easier. But everything else, it was still just kind of snowballing, and where I was feeling like it was everybody else's fault that I wasn't where I wanted to be in life. And
Yeah.
all these things had happened. And when I realized that I could create something entirely different for myself.
So what I'm kind of hearing earlier, you mentioned how sometimes it's like you put on the performance. I think you were talking about people judging, right? So it's like you don't want to be judged, so you put on a certain performance here, but underneath you're actually doing the very thing that you're putting on the performance to avoid. So it's like you take accountability on the surface to avoid the judgment of not being accountable,
Mhm.
but you're not taking accountability internally. So it's kind of like, as an entrepreneur, it's the difference between when you're the boss and the employee. When you're the employee, you don't have to take it to the same level you do when you're an entrepreneur, and you're fully responsible for how things play out in the business. When you're an employee, you only have as much responsibility as your role, and then it it goes up or down or whatever. Like, it's a lot easier to kind of deflect in that sense. And no judgment, because it's like there's roles, like there's pros and cons to everything. Um, but it's like the sense of ownership. So it's like you can take accountability without taking ownership.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that distinction. Um,
I think it's really powerful just from the perspective of this, like the whole idea is starting over, right? And life happens to all of us, and it's like it's real easy, especially with our culture, to make things be positive. Like, oh, I'm really grateful because I got this out of this, even though, like the gift of darkness, turning lemon to lemonade, like all of those kinds of things, which are great. And it's like, how deep do you take that? Like, when something happens that you don't like, like you don't like it, and it makes you angry and frustrated, and you want to fight, and your resistance gets triggered. Like, where's the blame? Where's the ownership? And I think that's really powerful, because if something keeps happening, there's another layer of ownership that can, like, shift that. And obviously it's a process. It's not just like, oh, I take ownership, everything's better and changed now. Um, I kept finding myself in codependent relationships, or mostly friendships, almost all friendships. And very different, like on the outside, the people that I would have codependent friendships were very different. Like, you wouldn't see any, like, obvious, maybe you would, but like I didn't see any common patterns, because I was like, okay, that friendship didn't work, this one looks like it would be better, and I'd invest a lot into it, and it was still the same pattern over and over again. And it left me in the worst, like the worst survival mode I've ever been in. I was in such I was like, I'm crazy right now. And I wasn't psychotic, but I was definitely not in my right mind when I left that situation. My fight or flight was deeply, deeply, deeply triggered. It took me years to start to feel like myself again. And it was real easy to blame, well, it was this and it was that and it was this and it was that. And that, like you said, those things all did play a role in how things played out. But when I got really honest with myself, I didn't want to take ownership of my own decisions. I didn't want to take ownerships of the consequences for the feelings inside that I didn't want to face. I was like, I'm afraid of that. I don't want to look at it. I'll just ignore it. The funny thing is, the fear is not even that big. Like, it's like having a fear of fish, and then you look and you're like, it's a goldfish. What the heck, man? Like, it's not even a barracuda. Like, what? But like, sometimes in the avoidance, the fears just get big, and then we create situations that are actually worthy of our fear, but it's like completely to avoid facing the smaller fear. And it's like the ownership of that really does make a difference, because it's like I get to be the main character in my story. I don't keep putting myself as the side character in somebody else's story, which is basically exactly what I was doing in this codependent pattern. Um, and I mean, I still am learning it, because it's so deeply ingrained, and I didn't know different, and all of that. It's a process. Unwind, unwind, unwind. This is me unwinding it, and then there's more to do. Um, but it's powerful.
it is powerful. I like how you said that though, and I think that's an interesting realization. And from what I know and some of the things, like I know and have seen that you have so much power. You have so much skill and so much knowledge and so much wisdom to be able to bring to the world. And it's not probably, I know that it is. much more terrifying to do that by yourself than it is to do it with someone else, under somebody else's partnership, under somebody else's framework, under somebody else's thing. And so hearing you say that now, after some of the conversations that we've had over the last couple of years, is huge.
Mm-hmm.
That,
Mm-hmm.
that you know that you don't need those other people in order to bring your power forward. And ultimately, those relationships with other people in some way are stunting you being able to be your fullest, most expressed self or your favorite self. And I think another thing that you said in there is that it's really hard because we have these habitual patterns and we just, like, you know, when you go into the grocery store, why this, I was thinking this earlier today, right? Like, you know, when you go into the grocery store, pretty much what you're going to expect. You get used to going to the same one. You know where the stuff is, you know where the dairy section is, you know where the cold stuff is, you know where the cereals are, like it's laid out the same way. And you might decide you want to go to a different grocery store, right? Because they've got a better fruit selection. And you might get a little bit hesitant before you go in because you still pretty much know what's going to be there, but it's going to be laid out different. So when you come into the main entrance, you might be coming into the freezer section instead of coming into the bakery section, right? Because the whole thing is laid out opposite end. And so while there are similarities, there are still some differences. And so we get so very good at behaving habitually, because we can't go into situations having to process all of the information all of the time. And so we start to get into those habitual patterns, and it takes conscious awareness of saying, okay, I'm going into a different grocery store today. It might be laid out different. So how can I navigate that the best way so that I don't get overwhelmed and forget all the stuff that I want to buy? Okay, I'm just going to do a list beforehand. And it's creating those new small patterns until it doesn't feel like it's newness. And a lot of times people are afraid that creating those new patterns are going to take as long to sort of remodel as the old patterns have been ingrained, but it can take days or weeks to
Mm-hmm.
remodel for the most part. But it is consciously, like you said, consciously choosing new ways of being and engaging that are different to the habitual patterns if you want to have a new, different experience. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
Something,
I love your,
can
what
I
was
ask,
that?
can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I kept on talking for a long time because I was in a big thought loop with the grocery store, which took a long time to explain. But when I said something about favorite self, you really,
Yes.
what came up for you with that?
That's what I actually wanted to ask you about. I love this so much because it's like, be your authentic self. Can we just address that for a second? Like, if I were my authentic self, I would I would just be pure energy. I wouldn't be in this mortal coil, as has been said in a poem, right? Like, my immortal, my most authentic self is not even viewable, like, honestly. And but that sounds silly, doesn't it? Like, you're gonna have, let me just be a ray of light and we're gonna have a conversation. Like, that's not what we're here for. We, in a sense, life is a lot like a stage. We are here to experience, to learn, to have a gamut of things that occurs. And like, just be your best self, or like align to your highest self, or be your authentic self. As a writer, that has always struck me as a crock of shit, because I can, for a long time, I practiced imitating other people's writing styles. And I love going through some of my old writing because it was like I'd be reading fantasy. And so I would write fantasy. And I don't even sound like the same person. And imitation was a big way of how I learned a lot of social cues because my brain didn't necessarily latch onto them just naturally. But at this point, like, I can write so many different ways. It all feels authentic. Like, it's just like there's endless ways, endless ways of expressing things. And like, it's determined, the best writing is like the purpose of the writing with the audience in mind and being as clear and concise within that as possible. So like, the clarity and conciseness in academic writing is very different than copywriting. It's like a totally different skill set. But it's the right skill set for those goals within that container. And we're the same way. Like, we have endless ways of expressing ourselves. Like, we can be so many different things that is actually overwhelming. And I think sometimes we stay in our habituated patterns because the alternative is so much. Like, people don't really talk about the overwhelm of potential as much as I feel like we could, because it is endlessly, like, there's endless possibilities, including who we can be and how we can authentically, even how we can authentically show up and be ourselves.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
that was a long, like, so with that, let's cut to our favorite self, because I love this. I think this is great.
Yeah. So I really love the concept of favorite self because, we hear so much about your authentic self or your best self. And one, I think, like, what is your authentic self? Your authentic self can be the person that is still showing up with all of those masks, like you said, or the person authentically, after this, I've got a business meeting. I still get to be me, but I might be a little bit different in that business meeting than I am in this type of a call, right? And I'm going to be a little
Mhm.
bit different in this than I am when I'm working with a personal training client.
Right.
All of those are my authentic self. And I'm not having to mask, I'm not having to show up a particular way, but they're all authentic. But if I were to try to be that authentic person in absolutely every single situation, it's going to feel weird and hard and off putting and not quite right. If I were to go skipping through the grocery store and being my authentic self, but it's not necessarily position appropriate or place appropriate, right? Um, and then our best self, a lot of times, is really judgy and comes with all of the conditioned patterns or the conditioned beliefs that we are led to believe are what we should be doing. And we live in post-capitalist consumer white supremacist society that is patriarchal. And so being my best self brings a lot of that cultural conditioning with it, right? Like, so what is your best self? Your best self is kind, or your best self is soft spoken, right? That's not necessarily true. And that might not be who you want to be or who we want to be. And so,
Mhm.
self is not having to say, a big giant fuck you to all of the people, but a lot of times it is. But it's like, no, okay, so my favorite self is, this is what's important to me, and I'm going to invite that into my life. And this is how I can show up to honor that part of me. Um, so I like to use the example of one of my recent clients. She felt really cluttered in her home, and she came to me because, she was starting to feel like she should be taking more responsibility at work. She should be moving away from an admin role into more of a supervisory role. And she should clear out her house, and she should be making some additions and upgrades to the house. But she was having a really hard time making decisions, and she should be doing all of these things. And as we worked through what was important for her, and it took the full 8 weeks to get there. She didn't have this, overnight. It was a step-by-step process to allow her nervous system and her defenses to kind of come down enough to illuminate this part. But she realized that what she really wanted, and like you alluded to this before, wasn't what she should be grateful for, right? So she had a home that had
Mhm.
been given to her, but really it was in someone else's name, but it was her kids, so, and their kids were minors. So she was living there, and she had decorated it, but she felt like everybody needed to be involved in the decisions and she should do this. And so all of the stuff was happening. And as we ultimately went through, she was like, well, I want my own house.
Mm.
They can have this one, and I can have my own house. And I said, okay, so is that realistic? And she said, yes. All I need to do is do this at work so I can get the promotion. I just need to do this. I need to budget. I would like to clear out my space. So where she felt like she had to hold on to all of the things, or part of her was having a hard time letting go of things because they were her things in everyone else's space. Once she
Uh,
was able to realize that her best self was probably being really grateful for everything that she had and starting to put away a nest egg and doing what everybody told her was the right thing. It's not what she fucking wanted to do. Right. And that's why it felt like there was so much friction, but there was so much conditioning that she couldn't even see what she really wanted to do. And when we allowed this space to play and be creative and lean into values and what's important and what does an ideal day look like, really pare it back and keep it simple, she was like, this is wild. This is what I want. And she's like, huh, okay, I got it. And then she's kind of like, she wanted to get off the call because she wanted to like go and get shit done. She's like, okay, I gotta go talk to my boss about the promotion, and I want to go clear stuff out, and I know where I'm going to donate the things. She was like, it was like all the light bulbs went off, and it was not in a way of like overwhelming work, but like, oh my God, I can see the possibility. I can see the way forward. So I think that's where you say, you kind of get up to the edge of that space and you don't even know what's possible over here until you come up against that space with the headlamp, right? And then you can illuminate it. And that's when she was ready to jump out of that pond and that space that she was in and leap over into the next one. And she's just like, okay, I'm off. I'm going to go do it. I'll see you later.
I love that a lot because it's like sometimes people will say you have to get to the end of your rope before the next thing appears. And there's truth to that. Like, I feel like that's a kind of a misguided sentence because you don't really have to wait till you get to the end of the rope, but like the path isn't necessarily, it's like you have to go through one corridor to get to the next corridor. And, it's not so much about getting to the end of something as well, I mean, it is though, because it's like when one road ends and you get to the next road. And so it's like, sometimes we think we have to have this view from the beginning to the end, right? Like if you want to get someplace, you need to know before you embark on the journey exactly how that journey is going to play out. And that works fine as long as you have all of the skill sets and knowledge base to get from point A to point end. But a lot of us don't. And that's when the starting over, it's a different way of planning or a different way of navigating. Because instead of going from the preconceived like idea of it, it is a lot like instead of this, it is like the headlamp like, with the light, where you have to explore the nooks and crannies to be able to find the next doorway that takes you to the next doorway to the next doorway. And it's a skill set, not in the same way of like a professional skill set, but it's a navigation skill set of recalibrating how to know something and in how knowing how to navigate it.
I love that. Yeah.
I think that's really useful. Like when I'm really loving the stories because it was like last week the first videos felt like kind of like the basis that like there is a path and you can choose a different adventure if you're not loving the one you want. So when you're starting over, you really can choose to start over on a path that lights you up. But it
Mhm.
like this week feels it's more like, well, what do you do when you're in the middle of it all? And like it's I think the biggest thing is just to to be committed to keep going. Like even if you get stuck and you're like feel like you're stuck in the mud and like things feel like they're moving really slowly or not moving at all, it's that commitment that you are moving forward even when it doesn't feel like it. Like because at some point there will be movement. But you also got to look for how to move. But like once you kind of figure out how the movement works in your new situation, it gets easier and it gets but that's where someone else can help. And it's like the coaching and the mentoring and like a good therapist. Like there's so many different types of resources to be able to help navigate in the middle.
Yeah. And I think you hit on a really good distinction earlier about the difference in sort of mentoring, coaching, therapy. Um, coaches and mentors, I've been a coach in some capacity for over 25 years. Um, And so, and it took me a long time to admit this, but it is the thing that I am really good at. Like beyond a shadow of a doubt, it is my skill set. Some people are great at painting, some people are great at hitting baseballs and being professional baseball players. I am really good at coaching. And I've trained coaches, I've taught coaching, I've led leaders on coaching, I've coached people in leadership positions who were at a higher leadership position than me. And that's the difference between a coach and a mentor. I coached people across the whole of my business. So people that worked in facilities management that were dealing with the HVAC systems. And I've coached people that have been in leadership positions for brands. And I've coached people who have worked on my own team. And I don't need to know the skill sets. I don't need to know the knowledge base of what it is that they're doing. I need to know person. And I don't even really need to know the person. I need to understand what questions to ask the person based on what it is that they're saying so that I can help them to navigate that journey. It's almost like helping them, guiding them where to put that next foot when they're in the dark or with the headlamp so that they know how to navigate and they can ask themselves those questions in future. A mentor is a person that's going to say, okay, I've got that job that you want to have in 5 years. Let me tell you the steps, the exact steps I took to get there, and let me help you navigate climbing up those steps. And the professional development or the personal development that you need in order to be ready to climb up to the next step. So it's much more skill set specific as opposed to behavioral specific, whereas coaching is very behavioral. And I see coaching as much more forward thinking and forward planning and progressing than therapy. Therapy tends to do a whole lot of excavating on where we are, why we're where we are, what happened in our past, what's informed our decision making so far. And to a degree, we look at that in my coaching because we need to have that foundation and that understanding so that we know that it's safe to take that next jumping off point. But a lot of the previous work that I do when we're looking back, it's looking for other evidence to support the belief of how we want to move forward. So, when somebody says I'm not organized, I'm just, I'm not organized enough to own my own business, I can't do it, but I've always dreamt about it. And say, okay, so let's look at your past. Let's look at all the times when you have been organized, right? Let's find that evidence bank and let's look back and see so that you can start to see those types of things. And it's not necessarily the reticular activating system, but your brain works the same way to start then seeing the evidence of proving yourself to be right because your brain just wants to be right.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Therapy does a whole lot of looking back. Mentoring does a whole lot of skill set work, and coaching is a bit more about the whole person behaviorally in the moment and how they want to move forward.
I had a friend that explained coaching as it's goal oriented, where therapy is more like a reconciliation process. But I mean, even reconciliation is a goal. I think that if you're really lost in the emotions and you don't necessarily need forward movement in life, you just need to make sense of things. Therapy is probably a really good place to start. But if you're stuck in the emotions and your life feels stuck, that's where coaching may be more useful. Mentoring works as long as you can replicate what the person is sharing and the path doesn't change too much.
Yes. Yeah. And I think they're all very valid in their own contexts and they've all got their own applications. I think mentoring often in the space that I've been working in for the last few years, when I think of my corporate days, right? Back in corporate, having had a mentor, there were people that I looked up to, but I never had a formal mentor. But that would have helped me massively to have had a mentor that could help me in navigating situations, like a more senior leader that could talk to me about, this is how to navigate that situation. This is the skill set that you're missing in your role, and help me learn that skill set. In the online space, I think it's wildly different because somebody can say that they're a mentor and they're going to teach you their social media strategy, but what they're forgetting is that they're already a content marketer, or they already have 10,000 followers, or they already have a perfect offer, or they already have something. And what they're not necessarily great at seeing is what the missing piece is in an individual puzzle. It's like there's almost too many
Yeah.
moving parts sometimes within the online space. And that's where that mentorship gets so very difficult to replicate.
Well, things have changed a lot. Like just, it's like a political change changes the online space. The changes in AI, which are like constant changes the online space. Like everything is just like, whoo. So it's like trying to dance with a barracuda. Like you don't know where it's gonna be. Like,
Mhm,
so yeah, focusing on what you can control and the navigation to me feels a lot more like something I can hold on to.
mhm.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question before we wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. When you think of your favorite self,
Uh-huh.
uh-huh,
This
again,
is good.
yeah. What are some of the characteristics of your favorite self?
So, like, I had a scooter and like I had it was a bigger scooter and I would like I haven't it's like my biker self like has been sleeping for like 10 years and I kind of miss that. Like I wasn't like biker club, but just like I'd wear the leathers and like everywhere on the bike like so there's a like I miss I miss riding something with the wind in my hair. Like, and so that would probably be a piece that would come up. That just came up this morning. So, like, whether I took on horseback riding or like got a convertible, like, I want to feel momentum with wind in my hair.
Mhm.
Um, the biking thing does kind of scare me more. Or getting. I owned a bike. I don't know where I left it in the United States, honestly. I'm
Like,
like, where's my bike? Like, where did I leave that? I don't know.
so if your favorite self was sitting here with you
Uh-huh.
and she heard you say that you miss the wind in your hair and you miss that adventurous part of you, what would she want you to know?
Um, that it's not so far away. There's a seed to plant. Like it's just the awareness that I'm missing it. And then it's like, what steps can come forward? It's just like, how do I navigate that? Like, do I set a goal? Do I put the intention out and let the universe bring it to me? Um, do I go get a job and learn like at a water park where they have one of those fake surfing things and get on the surfboard? Like it's endless, right? Like I so many options. It's interesting that surfing would pop up instead of riding a bike, but whatever. Like it's the wind in my hair. Like literally, it's the wind in my hair.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
go take
So
up parasailing.
what's an easy step that you can do? What would she want you to do or to believe now?
Well, I mean, just putting myself in the space of that, like attracting that experience is very much where I am right now. Like I've come to realize that the schemes of my mind are not what move me forward. Like in my navigations, right? Like I have schemed and I've schemed and I've schemed, and none of my schemes have come to be. I work a lot better if I focus on the energy of it, like the vibration. So like what does it feel like to be on the back of a motorcycle or the front of a motor and just, like with the wind in my hair or like an amusement, like a roller coaster, like literally, what is the sensation like with wind in my hair? What does it
Mhm.
feel like if I'm paragliding or if I don't, just something like paddleboarding? I don't think it has the same rush, but like if I'm on a bike and I'm going downhill because I don't pedal very fast, like and then really feeling it and then feeling the exhilaration like in my gut. Like for you were talking about you have a lot of buzz here. If you have a lot of buzz here, it's a warning. This is where you like it. I like it in my gut. Like that's where that's it aligns with my human design too. So like, yeah. And then it's like once I put that, it will come to me in whatever form. But if I'm trying to scheme, like, okay, I'm gonna save this much money and go buy my Harley, that doesn't work for me. I know some people works really well for, but that's not how I'm designed to create things. So yeah, it's more like really getting grounded on the vibration of what the sensation would be.
Mhm, mhm. I
Does
love
that
that.
answer your question?
It does. Yeah.
Cool.
You can maybe make a commitment to grounding into that energy and feeling it a little bit
Hmm.
more often,
Yeah.
and conscious
Well, I
and
mean,
creation
it,
of that energy and seeing what pops up for you.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's a lot easier. That's something that I don't do when I'm like being on camera isn't the same as me grounding my desires. That's a very personal experience. And so I'm not going to go fully into it while I'm on camera. That's not, there's a
No, no,
performance element.
but it's having that awareness of creating that space for you
Yeah.
to do it when we're not in a conversation, when you've got your meditation time or
Yes. Yes.
yeah, you can go away,
Exactly.
be more deliberate about creating that energy and intention. And then,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, that's when the opportunity then presents itself because you're in that energy, you're feeling it, and then you're more aware of the opportunity, or you'll have an aha. You'll be like, okay, well, I know it. Today I'm going to go rent a bike. I'm going to go do the thing, or someday
Right.
show up at your
I'm going to
house.
go
Hey, you
to
want to?
Bali and get a moped. Like, whatever.
Yeah, one of those. Fabulous. This
Yes.
has been so exciting.
It has been. I've had a great conversation. We could go on forever. Might
We
have to
could,
do this again.
I could talk to you pretty much forever. Yes.
Yeah. Chatterboxes. We just get together and said, yeah. Wonderful. I would like to wrap up and thank you for being on my YouTube channel and I hope you have a great day.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for asking me to be on your YouTube channel. This has been really good
My
fun.
pleasure, really.
Awesome.